Hello everyone, it's TJ. Welcome back to my channel. It's great to have you back or to have you here for the first time, either super stoked. Before we get into the case today, I just wanted to do a bit of an update or just a comment about the case of Amber Lee Cruikshank, who went missing from Kingston 25 years ago, the little 2-year-old, and the $100,000 reward that is out at the moment. I did a bit of a cover of the case, which I'll put link in the description box below if you haven't seen it. But apparently, from what I've seen on the media, heaps and heaps and heaps of tips have come into place, which is awesome because hopefully some of those tips turn out to be like credible and the case gets solved. But I just wonder why on earth it took money for these people to come forward. But that's just my thing, my opinion. Don't have to agree with me. But in light of this, I want to thank the people that donate to the channel. Because of the donations, I was able to pay for that YouTube video to get passed around Facebook to hundreds of people. And I received a tip myself from a member of the public that's seen the video, which I passed on to police. So I want to thank those people that support the channel. Even if it's just a $3 donation, it actually goes a long way. I can do a lot with it. But let's get into today's case. Today we are talking about the story of David Hart, and this is in the media right now, so it's just sort of happened in the last week or so. Bones found under the house, fraud, gold, and the tragic story of David Hart. So this is an interesting one. Let's get into it. So first we are going to nzherald.co.nz. Actually, the two articles we are looking at today are both by nzherald.co.nz, and they are by a guy called Tom Delane. So he's done really good work on the two articles. Mount Eden bones in backyard. Auckland human remains of David Hart, officially a homicide investigation. This was published 11th of April, so about a week ago. It was a house for men to hide from society while alive, and last week police confirmed it was also the place to hide a murder. Someone managed to keep that secret for at least a decade. The Mount Eden property, beneath which human remains encased in concrete were found on January 31st last year, is now officially being treated as a homicide investigation. The bones were, on September the 4th, identified as the house's past owner, David Stanley Hart, who for decades, until about 2004, ran a ramshackle boarding house out of the weatherboard double-storey building. A rotating scruff of 5 or 6 men constantly filtered through the cheap cash-only lodgings, rarely settling for long. Ex-crims and elderly alcoholics were the typical clientele. On announcing the elevation of the investigation to a murder, police noted the extreme difficulty of the case, obscured by 15-odd years and the social isolation of the tenants. At this time, we are not able to provide a cause of death. Police do regard the death as suspicious, and it is being treated as a homicide, a police spokeswoman said. In September, when Hart was identified, police said they had spoken to a number of people in New Zealand and overseas who had lived at the Marlborough Street boarding house. They were interested in anyone who had contact with Hart from 2004 onwards. While the investigation's elevation to a homicide may appear a relatively obvious development on the surface, well, he was, encased in concrete, I don't think he did to himself, several others who knew Hart had their own more hopeful theories on what had transpired. An old acquaintance from Blackpool on the west coast, Neville Sheehan, was convinced that Hart had just permanently moved to Australia, where he used to travel regularly in the 70s and 80s to gold mine with his brother, who has since died of cancer. Marlborough Street neighbours and the property's current owner, Peter Marsden, speculated the dysfunctional boarders at the house decided to bury Hart after finding him dead, as the official outlets for reporting a death were not the marginalised tenants' style. But police are not so optimistic. The Herald can now reveal fresh details about David Hart, who would have been 80 if he were alive today. Neighbours who have lived on Marlborough Street for 50 years had no idea what Hart did for a living or how he came into possession of the inner city property. However, it is now understood that David Hart was employed as a tally clerk on the Auckland waterfront during the 70s and 80s. A colleague of his there, Kevin Webb, said Hart's nickname was the Gold Digger. He said Dave was an interesting person. He thought he knew everything about anything and would rattle on for hours. We all know people like this, believe me. One thing he used to talk about was prospecting for gold in the South Island, which he had done on annual leave. He claimed he could make more money panning for gold than what he earned as a tally clerk, which was pretty good in those days. It was noted by one past resident of the Marlborough Street boarding house, who has spoken to police several times over the case, that there was tension between D'Angelo and Hart. The ex-lodger characterised both men as extremely eccentric. D'Angelo, also known as George Ormsby, died at the Marlborough Street property on September the 26th, 2016. Accounts of D'Angelo, who took over control of the boarding house once Hart disappeared somewhere in the 2000s, are vastly contrasting. He was always okay to me, but he was always a bit weird. Extremely weird, a past resident said. He used to wear sunglasses and gumboots the whole time. I don't know if that's... Yeah, that could be weird. You know, I know some people that wear gumboots all the time, but... Yeah, I don't know. I've got sunglasses. Some of the stuff he said, you just shook your head like, okay... Good night, bye. I saw him in the pub years after I left and asked him how Dave was. He said, oh yeah, Dave, I haven't heard from him. D'Angelo also had an association of sorts with the musician Don McGlashan. McGlashan confirmed to the Herald he first met D'Angelo in the mid-80s when he was assisting inmates at the Palermo maximum security prison in Auckland. He was an intelligent man, McGlashan said. And this is this Don McGlashan. I don't even know who he is. Apparently he's famous, but I wouldn't know. He seemed like the kind of guy that had things gone better for him in his life, he might have actually been a full-time professional musician. The other specks of information that can be gleaned of Hart's life are confusing. Murray Goldings, 46, has lived on Marlborough Street his entire life and provided an advertent summary of Hart's presence in the neighbourhood. He said he was sort of a bit of a loner. He was there for many years by himself. There was only him, and then all the boarders came later on. There were rumours he went to Australia, and there was another rumour he had dementia and had gone to a home somewhere. I reckon it would be over 10 years ago. He disappeared and no one knew why. And very interesting. We'll get into the next article in a moment and find out some more information that has come to information on any of the cases that I cover. You can call Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111. You can go online and find them as well. You can call police on 105 or contact your local police station. For case suggestions, you can send them to me at nzmissing@gmail.com. We are on podcasts wherever you listen to your greatest ones. We are also on Facebook. Join us there. If you would like to donate to the channel, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/nzmysteries or PayPal. Both are in the description box below. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. The likes help because then I know what content you're into, and subscribing helps the show immensely, even though it doesn't mean bugger all to you. So please do that. Let's get back into it. So again, we are at nzherald.co.nz. Fraud, gold nuggets and 400 kilograms of concrete. Police speak on the Mount Eden bones in the backyard case. And this came out 18th of April, so that was yesterday. And again by Tom Delane. You may not be guilty of murder for fraudulently acting as a man entombed under 400 Gs of concrete, but it sure raises some questions. That's the hidden detail that until now the New Zealand public have been unaware of in the case of David Hart, whose remains were found under his Mount Eden home on January 31st last year. The bones had laid under a mound of concrete on the dirt floor of a basement workroom in the Marlborough Street property since early 2004. The door had been jibbed securely shut, and for the next 12 years a ramshackle boarding house in the weatherboard double-storey building above continued to operate. Ex-crims and elderly alcoholics were the typical clientele of the cash-only lodgings, rarely settling for long. The only difference is that Hart was no longer the landlord. In his place was an existing tenant who had spent time in a maximum security prison in the 80s for violent crimes, who continued to pay the rates on the property until he died in 2016. The detective overseeing the case, Senior Sergeant Glenn Baldwin, this week spoke to the Herald about the difficulties of a cold case, the likes of which he has only seen once before in his career. I've only seen this kind of thing on TV, but here you go. It's one of those fascinating, really challenging cases, he said. What happened to David Hart? It is sad that nobody missed him for all that time for whatever reason. He was an interesting, eccentric character. The crime scene was very limited, and that's often a start point for a criminal investigation, let alone an investigation into the death of somebody. The house was completely gutted. We did luminol, which is chemical blood search, the scene in the event that might yield something, but the scene has undergone a massive renovation. I mean, gosh, it was years, so yeah, the chances of finding anything, not good. We're always playing a little bit of catch up. The time for a body to become skeletal. It was obviously not something that had happened overnight, but some time ago. Nevertheless, Baldwin this week revealed a key piece of evidence that allowed police to elevate the case to a homicide investigation and identify a person of interest in Hart's murder. It relates to a second property that Hart owned in Blackpool on the west coast, where he used to travel to with his brother in the 70s and 80s to gold prospect. Hart's nickname on the Auckland waterfront, where he worked as a tally clerk, was the Gold Digger. Baldwin said it was mentioned among several of the old Marlborough Street residents police spoke to that he may have gold nuggets in his possession, which he on rare occasions showed other boarders. So are we looking for a motive here? There was talk he might not have been cashing up the gold. An urban myth was that he collected some of the gold. He was not super trusting of banks, but that said, he used banks. Hart's last transaction for his ASB account was March 2004, and after this point, Baldwin says police have found no one with any recollection of seeing Hart. However, in early 2005, someone reporting, don't know that word, to be Hart tried to sell his Blackpool property. Who would do that? That's strange. This person had contacted the Grey River Council and tried to have the rates of the Blackpool property transferred into the potential West Coast buyer's name. Baldwin said, when our investigators were down there, they made contact with this person who had tried to acquire the property, and they still had some correspondence from back then, which was fortunate for us. He said the document itself was typed, but the envelope was handwritten, so we were able to get that handwriting analysed, and we were able to get some sample handwriting of our person of interest and verify that the person of interest was indeed the author of those letters reporting to be Mr. Hart. That person of interest is the same Marlborough Street tenant who took over control of the boarding house after Hart's disappearance in 2004. This person spent time in the 80s in Paremoremo Maximum Prison in Auckland for violent crimes. Baldwin confirmed he had a violent past. But the man died in 2016 of natural causes, at which point the Marlborough Street property went into rates arrears and was sold in 2017. If he was alive now, he would be someone we would definitely like to speak to. I think he would hold a number of answers for us, Baldwin said, but it doesn't sound like he'd be the type of person to speak anyway, really. Our person of interest may well be, and probably is, guilty of fraud offences pertaining to paying the rates and thinking it's his own house and trying to sell somebody else's house, I guess. But as far as being culpable for death, there's an evidential gap there for us. He's certainly someone who would appear to know David Hart's not around or probably dead. But again, that's still short of being able to prove to a high standard he's responsible for the death. It doesn't exclude him, but we don't have the evidence to be able to say that. I think it is important to the public understand that there's not a random killer running around Auckland. Our person of interest had a link to the address, as did our deceased. Baldwin says police are particularly interested in the period from late 2003 to early 2004 and are still seeking tenants at the Marlborough Street boarding house from that period. So if you know anyone that was likely to be around this boarding house or attached to it in some way around those years or around those times, let them know about this. Baldwin said, I would be surprised if there weren't some behaviours at the time of David's death that didn't elevate somebody's suspicions or concerns about something being not quite right. The police investigation has so far spoken to a lot of past residents, as far away as the UK and France. What a crazy, just crazy. Two figures of particular interest are a man described as the Polish guy and an Asian woman who police believe was a friend of Hart's. It's not clear whether she may have been a partner of David or not, or whether or not she might have just been somebody that visited the address or a short-term resident, Baldwin said. At this point, we don't have a name. We don't have anything other than people referencing a shorter woman, sort of a plump build, Asian, possibly Thai or Indonesian, and we'd like to identify and speak with her. The delivery of 400, do you know how much kilograms? 400 kilograms of concrete to the Marlborough Street house is also one of the main leads police are keen to get more information about. I think this concrete has been poured over David's body to entomb him. That would take some time, Baldwin said. If the concrete is mixed in a wheelbarrow, there's some effort in mixing 400 kilos of concrete. So if that triggers some memory or something about some unusual behaviours or things that were going on at the address, we'd really like to hear from those people. Police would like to hear from anyone who knows anything about building supplies delivered to 3 Marlborough Street around 2003 to 2004. Other details police have uncovered of David Hart's life are sketchy, but Baldwin can reveal he had undiagnosed diabetes, which may have caused him mood fluctuations. Baldwin continues, I guess interpreting and trying to understand our victimology, he was potentially difficult to deal with, could be abrasive, but then could be quite enthusiastic to see and talk to people, perhaps to the point of, I'm ready for this conversation to be over now. That's how some of the neighbours portrayed it. So I think at times he could be friendly, but other times he couldn't. The identification of Hart's remains on September the 4th, 2020 came courtesy of a blood sample of his brother, retrieved from a district health board when he died 5 or 6 years ago from cancer. DNA evidence from the Mount Eden bones, connected them to this DHB blood sample. Both of them shared the same father. David Hart would have been 80 today if he was still alive. After getting in contact with some of Hart's living nieces and nephews, it was uncovered he was estranged from his brother for decades after a bust-up at their father's funeral. Sadly, nobody missed David. Isolated from his family, I don't think there was anything specifically malicious about that. It's really sad when someone's not missed, and I think it happens more than we realise. Some elderly people are really, really lonely, and you wonder if they passed on, who would notice. Baldwin says a year of COVID-19 strained police resources, but the investigative team overseeing the Hart case met early this month to discuss the next steps. He believes people out there still have information and urges them to ring 09 302 6557. I'll have that number in the description box below. David Hart didn't deserve to die the way he has obviously died. I don't know the cause of death, but I know he's ended up buried under concrete and nobody deserves that, Baldwin says. I believe he has been killed and somebody is responsible for that. He might have been at times difficult to deal with, but he didn't deserve that. People who may have known some of the characters living at that house may have some apprehension and fear of those people. A person of interest is deceased, so if somebody has information they can come forward safely. We really encourage people to do that. Do the right thing for David. He deserves to have his story told and understood. David didn't deserve to die, whichever way that happened, and be buried like that, and then for no one to even know that he'd gone or no one to ever say anything. So I definitely think that someone needs to come forward now. It's definitely time. If you know anything, the person of interest is deceased, so you could still go to Crime Stoppers and come up anonymously and tell your story. Really need to. Thanks for listening to me today. Sorry about the mouth mush. Mouth mush happens. And we will see you in the next story. Have a good day, good week. Love yous all. Bye now.